During the events of Civil War, Spider-Man ultimately decided to side with Iron Man, and to prove how loyal he was to the cause, he even decided to publicly unmask, to show just how much he believed in his friend Tony Stark and the idea of the Superhuman Registration Act. However, this turned out to be the wrong choice for Peter in the end. Not only was his life at risk as a result of his choice, and as a result of ultimately changing his mind, but also the lives of those he loved were threatened as well. Peter Parker almost ended up being shot to death at the behest of Kingpin, who put a hit out on him, and as a result of surviving that, being nearly missed, Aunt May instead ended up taking a bullet and almost lost her life, being put into intensive care. Peter Parker would also end up losing his marriage after he and Mary Jane made a deal with Mephisto in order to save Aunt May's life. So really, it's pretty impressive that Peter managed to survive this whole overall fairly awful ordeal, both when it comes to keeping his life and keeping his sanity. Number 9. Witnessing Aunt May's romance. During a time where Peter swapped bodies with Dr. Octopus, he found himself trapped in his body and in Dr. Ock's mind. Because of this, Peter ended up forced to watch a memory that Otto had of a night of passion with Peter's own Aunt May before their almost wedding at the time. Sure, Peter has survived a lot of physical beatings and extremely devastating disasters, but the emotional trauma of this one, I do not know how he did it. Peter obviously did not want to see this, and yet he was forced to. And still afterward, he manages to be able to look both Otto and Aunt May in the eye when he needs to. I do not know how though. Not only did Peter survive this, by the way, but also survived witnessing all the beatings from Otto's perspective that he, as Spider-Man, had given him via Otto's memories. That is some mental and emotional durability right there. Although I guess this version of Peter kind of died, as he only managed to survive via his subconscious after this. Here's hoping he managed to forget this at least, somehow. Maybe because only his subconscious kind of survived, his consciousness of this is like, boop, gone. I hope so. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to learn about some more crazy things that Spider-Man has survived, there's lots out there, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. Electrocuted and thrown from a skyscraper. During the events of Marvel Knight's Spider-Man, as early as the 3rd issue in, Spider-Man gets badly beaten and ends up in such a bad way that he is rushed to the ER. This all happens after Aunt May has seemingly been kidnapped. In this much darker take on Spider-Man's world, as written by Mark Miller, Spider-Man confronts Electro and the Vulture, suspecting they may have been involved. During this fight, Spider-Man gets badly electrocuted more than once by Electro. In fact, at one point he is so severely and dramatically electrocuted that he ends up being flinged from a skyscraper and plummets to the ground, before he can recover enough to even shoot a web and swing to safety. Instead, he smashes all the way down and through a cab, knocked unconscious and badly injured. The paramedics then rush him to the hospital. That is how severely Electro injured him. Of course, this is Spider-Man, and somehow, miraculously, he manages to survive, but whew, it was definitely a close call. Number 7. Sinister War. Sinister War also really scrambled Spider-Man up. I mean, what's worse than one team of 6 sinister villains? How about a whole bunch of Sinister 6 teams? Which is exactly the trial that Peter faced during Sinister War. Pretty much all of the villains he came up against seemed to also want Spider-Man for one reason or another. And while some fought to actually protect Spidey, many more were fighting to harm, capture, or perhaps even kill him. Needless to say, it was one long night for Spider-Man, with him dealing with fight after fight to the point that he couldn't even catch his breath. Number 6. Missile Explosion. During issues 523 and 524 of The Amazing Spider-Man, we learned that Spider-Man managed to survive the explosion of a massive missile that was filled with toxins. Not only did we see Peter survive the explosion, but he also survived the fallout after being saved by Iron Man. Stark secured Peter and took him back to the Avengers mansion as quickly as possible so that he could treat him for the toxins he had been exposed to and his injuries. Fortunately, Peter is so durable, with such a tough immune system apparently, that he was able to fight off most of the effects until Stark managed to treat him, and in so doing, Stark saved his life. It's pretty convenient. He also happened to arrive at just the right time, as Peter was also about to fall at terminal velocity into the ocean, the impact of which could have killed him. Quite lucky that he's so tough and that Iron Man arrived in the nick of time. That all worked out pretty well. Number 5. The Wrath of the SRA. Spider-Man not only impressively survived unmasking for his pal Tony Stark during the events of Civil War, but he also managed to survive betraying Tony as well. When Spider-Man got a good look at the camp Stark's side of the war were running, he realized that he had made the wrong choice, and attempted to walk out. Iron Man, however, isn't ready to let Peter go, and attempts to stop him. He tries to tell S.H.I.E.L.D. to just bring Spider-Man in quietly, as all Tony wants to do is talk to him. He doesn't want to fight, but S.H.I.E.L.D., under the Superhuman Registration Act, denies Stark's request and attempts to have Spider-Man apprehended and arrested, sending the top secret Thunderbolts team that they have amassed after Spider-Man. They send Jack-O-Lantern and Jester III, and if it weren't for the interference of Punisher, he may have ended up dead at their hands. Well, S.H.I.E.L.D. was ready to rein in their team members when it came to how much force they were using, but still, they already kind of almost killed Spider-Man at that point, putting him in critical condition by the time Punisher showed up to save him. You can see the fight and the shape that Peter is in by the end of it in issue number 5 of the first Civil War series. Number 4. Beat Down by Morlun. During the story The Other, Peter seemed to be suffering from and ultimately dying of a mysterious illness. While struggling with this, Morlun decided to pay Spider-Man a visit just to basically torment him. Focused on his potential impending death, Spider-Man is caught unawares when Morlun attacks him while he's swinging around the city attempting to clear his mind. The two have an insanely explosive fight, but just as Peter thinks he has the upper hand, Morlun brutally defeats him. He plucks out Spider-Man's eye and eats it, and then beats him to within an inch of his life. Spider-Man manages to survive this attack despite him losing an eye and being beaten to a pulp by Morlun. Number 3. Killed by Kraven. In reality, Kraven never really killed Peter, although we were meant to believe that he had killed Spider-Man. I mean, it definitely looked like he had killed Spider-Man. Kraven at one point sets out in Kraven's last hunt to beat Spider-Man by replacing him and proving that he is better than Spider-Man is. However, in the end, he begins to question if he's truly beaten Spider-Man, and who actually makes a better Spider. He realizes that there is no one quite like Peter Parker when it comes to being Spider-Man, just as Spider-Man himself seemingly returns from the dead. In truth, Kraven had merely administered a drug that had made Peter seem dead, probably slowing his heart rate, definitely making him trip out, and putting him in a stasis for a few weeks. Spider-Man, however, was buried alive by Kraven and wakes up in his grave. Pretty sure he was also shot point blank by Kraven, but anyways. Spider-Man then has to dig his way out and find his way back to the villain for that final confrontation. The story ends with Kraven taking his own life, believing he had finally accomplished everything in his life that he had set out to do. But don't worry, Kraven would come back, because Kraven. Number 2. Body failure. Another time that Peter Parker died, it was actually as Dr. Otto Octavius. During the time of Superior Spider-Man, Otto got a hold of Peter's body by tricking him into a body swap. With Peter's consciousness stuck in Otto's old failing body, when it died, so seemingly did Spider-Man. I mean, we still had Peter's body, but for now, Otto was the one behind the steering wheel. Fortunately, while Peter did kind of die, he also managed to survive, as Otto was unable to wipe Peter's complete consciousness clean from his own body, and his subconscious kinda lingered there. In the end, Otto gave up his own hold over Spider-Man's body in order to let Peter Parker reclaim his body and his mantle once more. Otto was compelled to do this when he realized that even with all that he had done, he could never truly be a better Spider-Man than Peter, because he was kind of missing the moral compass, which was part of what truly made Peter Parker superior. Also, he needed Peter's help, because he was like, I'm trying to save the woman I love and it's like impossible, please. I need the real Spider-Man, help. Number 1. Annihilation of his universe. Miles Morales didn't just survive the death or a bad beatdown, but actually managed to survive the destruction of his entire universe. Following the events of Secret Wars and the creation and dissolution of Emperor Doom's Battleworld, Miles Morales somehow managed to survive after his entire reality of Earth 1610 was pretty much completely destroyed. How? Well, Miles Morales' Spider-Man managed to earn a new life for his family and himself on the reinstated reality of Earth Earth 616, all because of an act of kindness in combination with a weird quirk. Molecule Man had been asking for a snack, and Miles happened to have a burger in the pocket of his suit, which he gave him. As a result, Molecule Man decided to make sure when the universe was recreated, using his powers, that Miles and his family had a place in it. How nice. He also gave Miles' uncle Aaron Davis a new lease on life in the Earth 616 reality as well. Pretty sure he also brought his mom back to life too. Earth 1610 has returned since its destruction, and one of its other survivors, the Maker, even managed to return to it. But at the time, it wasn't around. So, still pretty cool that Miles survived that.
Coming in at number 10, we have the time that Tony Stark faked his own death in order to keep his secret identity safe. During the Armour Wars event, which saw Iron Man trying to destroy all of the Stark Industries technology he had sold over the years, the iconic Avenger was put on the world's most wanted list for interfering with multiple nations' militaries. Since Tony Stark's alibi at the time was that Iron Man was actually his bodyguard, Tony had a fake biography and confession note written for a fictional man named Randall Pierce, and then faked this made-up bodyguard's death so that the Iron Man secret could be kept. Definitely an odd way to end an Iron Man crossover event, especially considering how public Tony would be with his secret identity just a few years down the road. Coming in at number 9, we have the time that Tony Stark erased his entire brain just to thwart Norman Osborn. Following an action-packed few years in the Marvel Universe that saw both Civil War and the Skrull invasion, the former Green Goblin had become the head of a new team of Dark Avengers. To protect all of the superheroes he had exposed during Civil War, Tony deleted all of the superhuman identities from the Superhero Registration Act, and implanted the data within a hard drive in his brain, making him Osborn's #1 target. To prevent the Green Goblin from gaining all of this knowledge, Tony eventually wiped his entire brain clean, relying on a backup of his brain to restore most of his usual memories once Norman had been safely locked up and taken care of. Coming in at number 8, we have the time that Iron Man was electrocuted by the God of Thunder himself. Tony Stark has made a lot of iffy choices in the comics, but few have been as disastrous as his attempt at a Thor clone. Intended to be a powerful deterrent against Cap's team during the Civil War event, this clone called Ragnarok quickly went out of control and caused the deaths of several heroes. Whenever the true Thor returned, he was furious at what Tony had done with his genetic code and fried every system in the suit of Iron Man armor, leaving Tony to walk back to Avengers HQ, humiliated and defeated, with one of the most decisive superhero smackdowns in comic book history, in a fight that Tony should be grateful he was still capable of walking away from. Coming in at number 7, we have the time that Iron Man flew a nuke through a wormhole. The end of the original Avengers film is one of the defining moments of the MCU, as Earth's mightiest heroes finally team up for the first time to put an end to Loki's Chitauri invasion in New York City. Faced with overwhelming odds, Tony Stark was ready to sacrifice himself by flying a nuclear missile launched by S.H.I.E.L.D., intended to take out the infection in New York, and instead shooting it through the wormhole to the Chitauri mothership. And while Tony would be lucky enough to survive the explosion and fall through the wormhole back to Earth, he would remain traumatized by these events for years to come, suffering from both survivor's guilt and existential terror at just how big the threats from beyond the stars could become. Totally not foreshadowing for Thanos, right? Coming in at number 6, we have the time that Tony got full-on punched by Captain Marvel. Which, honestly, with the amount that Iron Man seems to get into conflict with other superheroes, we're surprised this hasn't happened more often. During the climax of the event Civil War II, neither Tony Stark or Carol Danvers were willing to budge on their positions over the use of a future-seeing Inhuman, and thus Carol finally unleashed her full power to take Tony out with a single punch. And while at the time it seemed he was just knocked unconscious, it turns out that Carol's punch was so strong that it killed Tony's physical body, with his consciousness having to be backed up and placed inside a cloned replacement. Talk about learning how to handle a punch. Coming in at number 5, we have Tony sacrificing himself by flying directly into a psionic storm. During a period of time in which Marvel was looking to reboot their comic book universe, the villain known as Onslaught was waging war against the entire 616 plane of existence. A combination of the darkest parts of both Professor X and Magneto, Onslaught was a creature of pure psychic energy that was only able to be defeated when the Hulk managed to finally rip open his armor. Unfortunately, the only way to stop Onslaught was the destruction of the universe, a dramatic sacrifice that Tony and the Fantastic Four decided to make as they flew directly into Onslaught's psionic body, ending their universe and kickstarting the highly controversial Heroes Reborn storyline. Coming in at number 4, we have the time Tony Stark intentionally stopped his own heart to save his life, because the logic behind that totally makes sense. Tony's had his fair share of bad relationships over the years, but few have ended as poorly as his romance with Kathleen Dare, a woman who took Tony's playboy ways incredibly personally and would eventually get back at Tony by shooting him in the chest. Paralyzed from this attack and suffering from severe nerve damage, Tony decided to stop his own heart so that he'd be placed into cryostasis until a solution could be found to his nerve damage. Unfortunately, Tony didn't tell many people what his plan was, causing many of his friends to believe he had died for good. Not great communication skills there, Iron Man. Not great. Coming in at number 3, we have one of the most controversial Avengers storylines with the time Tony Stark replaced himself with a younger Tony. In the event known as The Crossing, a variant of the time-traveling villain, Kang the Conqueror, known as Immortus, began using the neural link in the Iron Man suit to secretly begin altering Tony Stark's brainwaves throughout time. Over time, Tony's morals were slowly eroded until he was an active threat to the rest of the Avengers team, a sleeper agent for Kang the Conqueror. While his teammates would try and return him to the side of good, they eventually were forced to ally themselves with a younger Tony Stark from the past, and permanently defeat the corrupted, older Iron Man. And while eventually this younger Tony would get retconned into being the true Tony Stark all along, this is still an intense example of just how dangerous Iron Man could be if he ever broke bad. Coming in at number 2, we have the time Iron Man and Captain America fought at the end of all existence. No, I'm not talking about the Civil War event, but rather a larger battle between the former friends during an event that saw the Marvel multiverse beginning to collapse in on itself during a storyline known as the Incursion. With both the Marvel and Ultimate Universes destroying one another as they collided, Cap was shocked to learn that Tony had known about this imminent destruction for years, and had been secretly trying to prevent it with the Illuminati rather than letting the rest of the Avengers know. This betrayal meant that Iron Man and Captain America spent their last moments in this universe punching one another, before eventually reality was reset into a new battle world. And finally, coming in at our top spot, we have the time that Iron Man got decapitated by the partner of Thanos. The battle for the Infinity Gauntlet in the MCU might not have ended with Tony Stark's survival either, but at least in the movies, Tony got to be reassured that they won first. In the comic books, Iron Man has a lot less to do with Thanos' eventual defeat, as during the final battle against Thanos, he's apparently killed off-panel by the recently created partner of Thanos, Terraxia, offering the torn-off head of the Iron Man armor to Thanos as a romantic gift. And while Tony would be restored to life once Thanos was defeated and all of his evils undone, it's still wild just how thoroughly he was beaten by the partner of the Mad Titan.
In Captain America issue 446 in 1968, the Red Skull has captured Captain America inside a cosmic cube, making Steve live in a fantasy where he saves Dr. Ernstein, Bucky never dies, and he gets to see his mother, giving him the goal of defeating the German stash. You know, the task he was created for. His whole dream inside the cube is created from his subconscious desires. It's much like a real dream, where some things just don't make much sense at all. The dream takes place during World War II, but some people have cell phones, and there are technologically advanced airships. That kind of thing. Eventually, Cap and Bucky Barnes make their way to the bunker that the German stash is supposedly in. But just as Steve is about to enter, his subconscious Bucky stops him. Bucky talks to Cap about how things here don't make much sense, how he's supposed to be dead, and how him saying all this is the Captain's subconscious just trying to break through. His subconscious tells him this is a dream. All of a sudden, Captain America is outside the cube and just outside the door to the Red Skull instead. Even the Red Skull is shocked that Captain America has the willpower to break out of a cosmic cube. Number 9. Smashed through multiple walls, beaten, and has a building dropped on his head. In Captain America Volume 4, number 31 and 32, Cap goes to visit his flame at the time, Rachel Layton, also known as Diamondback, who was working undercover for Red Skull. She turned on the Red Skull though because her love for Steve had grown and she couldn't kill him, which resulted in the Red Skull killing her. When Steve arrived, the Red Skull attacked in his superpowered suit. The fight involves Steve being thrown into and through multiple brick walls and through floors of an apartment building, being beaten rather ruthlessly by the Skull, and having the entire building demolished on top of him. Not to mention, this all happened after he had just found his lover dead. But Steve not only survived, he didn't break a single bone. He was able to get up and start fighting again. I mean, not very successfully, until the, surprise, not dead Rachel Layton intervened. Number 8. Used as a Cap missile by War Machine. Multiple times. In Secret Avengers number 10, the Secret Avengers have been distracted by a fake godlike entity in order for the mysterious group the Shadow Council, working with a group called the High Die, to kidnap Sharon Carter as a bargaining chip to trade for Shang-Chi, whose blood will allow the High Die to resurrect Shang-Chi's father, Zhang Zhu. But none of that matters. I just want to talk about when War Machine threw Captain America like a spear right into John Steele, another super soldier, slamming him into the ground in such a cool comic book image. Look at that! Captain America being Captain America just does a barrel roll out of it too. Completely unfazed. Number 7. Fighting Ultimate Hulk. In their first real battle against the Hulk, after he goes on a rampage through the city, the Ultimates try to bring down the big green guy. Giant Man and Iron Man both fail in their fights with Hulk, which is when Captain America enters the fray, dropping a whole tank on top of him. A tank that has Cap sitting inside of it. But this is the Hulk. And no puny tank dropped from hundreds of feet in the air is gonna stop him. Banner rips through the tank and engages Captain America directly. Or should I say that Cap engages him, putting up a hell of a fight, punching him in the face, kicking him where the sun don't shine, and shield bashing Hulk all over, until Hulk starts to absolutely pummel him. Luckily, Thor comes in to take Hulk's attention away, but he lived. He survived. Number 6. Having the super soldier serum sucked out of him. In Captain America Volume 7, Issue 21, the villain Iron Nail had gained control of a giant helicarrier mech called Gungnir, which is honestly really cool looking, and was using it to attack and destroy the city of Nirovekistan. I'm so sorry if I messed that up. The captain had infiltrated the mech and was confronting Iron Nail inside. Now look, his name may be lame, but in their fight he actually stabbed Captain America multiple times with tentacles that pulled the super soldier serum right out of his body. This caused Steve to be depowered, and on top of that, it rapidly aged the captain. Right as Steve was about to save the day too. Just kidding! Cap won, throwing his shield into Gungnir's core, and with the help from Sam Wilson, the Falcon defeated Iron Nail and escaped the mech. Number 5. Gets his costume charged by Gambit, who explodes it. During the X-Men vs. Avengers event, one-shot comics were produced that pitted single Avengers versus single X-Men. While a lot of these were great stories, there was one that stood out as a surprise. That would be the AVX vs. Volume 1, Number 2, that pitted Spider-Man against Juggernaut and Steve Rogers against none other than Remy LeBeau Gambit. For those of you who don't know, Gambit has the unusual mutant ability to convert the potential energy stored in an object into kinetic energy. Basically, turning objects into bombs. Captain America is, well, Captain America though, and he gets a little cocky, not thinking much of the X-Men. After failing the obvious tactic of using Cap's shield as a kinetic bomb, Gambit surprises Cap, charging Steve's armor and catching Steve off guard with a huge explosion. But when the dust settles, Gambit did nothing but get Cap's full, undivided attention. Cap rushes Remy, using his shield to guard against Remy's charged playing cards, and takes him out with a swift uppercut. I'm still a huge fan of Gambit though, can't lie. Number 4, a backhand from Thanos with the Infinity Gauntlet. During the iconic fight between the Avengers and the Mad Titan armed with the completed Infinity Gauntlet, Thanos easily beats almost all of the Avengers. Near the end of the fight, only Captain is left, and he calls Thanos out to battle him one-on-one. Cap's got some great lines here. As long as one man stands against you, Thanos, you will never be able to claim victory. A swing from the Mad Titan, and a dodge from Steve. But when hands sprout out of the ground, holding Steve in place, Thanos swings down on Cap's shield, yelling, "Then die you shall," and completely shatters the shield of Captain America. As he is about to land a killing blow on Steve, the Silver Surfer shows up in the nick of time and distracts Thanos, who, after getting a little punch from Cap, instead knocks Steve out cold with a quick backhand to the face. Not bad for an enhanced human against a mutant Eternal wielding the Infinity Gauntlet, who even the cosmic beings have trouble with. Unfortunately, us here at Top 10 Nerd, we don't have a super soldier serum. We gotta do this to survive. And it's because of you guys that we are able to do that. When you guys subscribe and like our videos, it lets YouTube know that we deserve to be here. Thank you guys for all your support. Alright, number 3. Thrown into an energy core and surviving. In Captain America number 38 in 1998, Captain America faces an adversary known as Protocide, a revived proto-super soldier. Protocide was given fake memories that back in World War II, Steve Rogers had killed him to remain the only American super soldier, which obviously isn't true. During a fight between the two, and a ton of Hydra agents, Cap saves Protocide from falling into an energy core. How does Protocide thank him? By throwing Steve into the energy core to kill him. Steve somehow survives using his shield as a platform to stand on while trying to think of a way out of the core. He quickly decides to sacrifice his own protection, subjecting himself to the full power of the core, to instead use his shield with the help of S.H.I.E.L.D., that's the acronym S.H.I.E.L.D., not the actual vibranium shield, to bust his way out of there with his clothes ripped to shreds and his body still intact. If that's the power of peak human conditioning, sign me up. Number 2. Zola virus. When Captain Rogers is teleported to the Zola dimension in Captain America Volume 7 in 2013, he is infected with a virus called the Zola virus, which puts him in constant pain and attempts to slowly take over his mind. While in Dimension Z, Steve gets his butt beat by Jet Zola, Arnim Zola's daughter, who counters his every move, almost breaking his back, and pushes him into a crowd of mutates who chew him up a bit. Then his ribs are broken and beaten by gamma-mutated cloned monstrosities of himself called Captain Zolandia. He gets blasted by Zola using his robotic body, and to top off the fight, he falls off of a cliff. Cap then just gets up, and using a knife, he cuts the Zola virus out of his chest. He cut a hole in his own chest and went on fighting. His mother did tell him getting back up was always the right thing to do though. Number 1, getting capped in the dome. Captain America has been shot so many times it makes 50 Cent jealous. Cap's been shot in the gut from a sniper, shot in the shoulder, shot in the leg multiple times and didn't even notice or care. But did you know that Steve Rogers has been capped in the dome? In Captain America and the Falcon issue 13 in 2011, Captain America takes a bullet to the dome that was meant for Sam Wilson. He was immediately rushed to hospital, and though he put up a fight, he was pronounced dead at 3:08 a.m. At the beginning of the next issue though, he suddenly wakes up, with the cause of his revival being placed on his, and I'm quoting this, unique metabolism. Captain America died for a grand total of 12 minutes that day, but he survived because of his metabolism. What? Alright nerds, that's the list. For a guy who's just really an enhanced human being,
The time that Thor was left for dead adrift in space, as seen in the MCU film Avengers Infinity War. Thor has a pretty brutal time during the 2 most recent Avengers movies, with Infinity War beginning with Thor having to watch both Loki and Heimdall die, and the Hulk be defeated by an intimidating new villain, Thanos. After this smackdown, Thor is left adrift in space with the remnants of the Asgardian refugee ship, something that would likely kill any human hero in the Marvel Universe, and yet Thor is able to survive until he conveniently bumps into the windshield of the Guardians of the Galaxy, showing that, I guess Asgardians are just really, really good at holding their breath. Coming in at number 9, we have the time Malekith turned Thor's liver into broken glass, a magical punishment that makes me wince just thinking about it. Malekith might get a bad rap for his lackluster portrayal in the film Thor: The Dark World, but in the comics he's been a pain in Thor's side for generations, And in this case, I mean that pretty literally. During an event that saw multiple Thors from different points of his timeline fighting against the Dark Elves, Malekith used his magic to torture a young Thor, and claimed to have turned his liver into a mound of broken glass within his own body. Understandably, this upset Thor, and his response was to spit shards of glass into Malekith's face, which is probably the most badass way possible to respond to some heavy internal bleeding. Coming in at number 8, we have all the times that Thor has wrestled with the Hulk. Whether it's in comic books, animated television shows, or billion-dollar blockbusters, Thor has always been one of the few heroes capable of standing up to the strength of the Incredible Hulk. And this usually puts him into an awkward position whenever the Jade Giant inevitably goes on a rampage. Whether battling on the streets of Earth or the gladiator arenas of the planet Sakaar, Hulk and Thor will likely continue to test their strength against one another for many years to come, if only because Thor is one of the few people that can tank a green punch and keep on swinging. Coming in at number 7, we have the time Thor chose to tear out both of his eyes in pursuit of knowledge. Desperate for a way to prevent the destruction that would be caused by the Asgardian event of Ragnarok, Thor visited the Well of Mimir, where Odin had once given up his eye in exchange for forbidden knowledge. However, Thor was stunned after removing his eye to find that the well still would not fill with water for him, only to slowly realize that since his father had already sacrificed an eye, he would need to up the sacrifice in order to be granted knowledge. Thus, Thor did the extremely metal act of ripping out both of his eyeballs, and despite his now literal blindness, was able to see the proper path forward to save the entire Marvel Universe. Coming in at number 6, we have the multiple occasions that Thor has survived the power of the sun. As an Asgardian that's thousands of years old, Thor's adventures have spanned all across the cosmos, and have led to Thor being put in the most destructive situations possible more often than you'd think. While aiding Adam Warlock in the Infinity Watch, Thor found himself having to withstand the strength of a star going supernova, an explosion that left him dazed and confused in an unknown location, but still undeniably alive and uninjured. Combined with the times that Thor has shrugged off attacks that have claimed to be as powerful as multiple exploding suns, and the God of Thunder really has an impressive survival resume. Coming in at number 5, we have the Norse event of Ragnarok. An ancient prophecy spelling both doom and rebirth for every living being in Asgard, the concept of Ragnarok has been used for multiple events throughout Thor's lifetime, and even adapted into one of the best MCU films. In the comics, however, Thor spent many years attempting to prevent Ragnarok, and when Asgard was finally fated to be destroyed, Thor defied the gods who had created the Asgardians and destroyed the World Tree, ending the constant cycle of Ragnarok and relocating Asgard to float directly above the state of Oklahoma. Definitely an odd way to end a story about the end of the universe, but hey, at least Thor's still alive. Coming in at number 4, we have the time Thor was destroyed by, who else? The Destroyer. During the big relaunch of Thor's self-titled series during the late 90s, Thor once again had to face off against one of his earliest foes, the Destroyer, as it relentlessly attacked the rest of the Avengers. In a stunning twist for a first issue of a new series, Thor was actually killed by this version of the Destroyer and sent to the realm of Hell, where Thor had to bargain and fight his way out of his imprisonment to return to Earth and save the rest of the Avengers. Does it still count as survival if you actually did die, you just don't stay in the afterlife though? Who knows at this point in the Marvel Universe. Coming in at number 3, we have the time Thor was turned to glass and then shattered by Thanos. In the MCU films, Thor and Thanos built up quite the intense and personal rivalry over just a couple films, but their confrontation in the comics version of the Infinity Gauntlet storyline somehow managed to knock the God of Thunder even lower. Thanos' reality-warping powers were put to use during his final battle, and just when Thor seemed ready to bring his hammer down on Thanos' head, the God of Thunder was turned to glass and then shattered, a humiliating defeat against a villain who, at this point, had complete control of the laws of the universe. Better luck next team-up event, Thor. Coming in at number 2, we have Thor surviving 3 direct attacks from the celestial Arishem. If you've seen Marvel's Eternals in the past year, you know just how huge Arishem is. And with Celestials being some of the most powerful beings throughout the entire Marvel universe, they are not creatures you want to mess with. However, after believing Arishem had killed his father Odin, Thor relentlessly attacked the Celestial with his hammer, refusing to back down even as Arishem brought his full strength down on him, finally claiming defeat by throwing the Celestial's own magical sword through his chest, even if by the end of this fight, Thor looked like his entire costume had been put through a shredder. And finally, coming in at our top spot, we have the time Thor survived the torture of the God Butcher for over 2 weeks. Gore the God Butcher has been one of Thor's biggest foes for the last decade of comics, and this year we'll finally get to see the villain on screen portrayed by Christian Bale in the MCU film Thor: Love and Thunder. In the comics, Gore is attempting to murder every deity across the Marvel Universe, and after capturing a young Thor, boasts that even gods of torture can only last moments under his interrogation techniques. Amazingly, Thor held out against Gore's torture for 17 days, before finally being able to free himself due to the arrival of his Viking allies. This scenario would scar Thor physically and mentally for many ages to come, but being able to survive the God Butcher for such a long time is something Thor should be truly proud of.
Number 10, relationship with Eddie Brock. The love that Eddie and the Venom symbiote feel for one another is strong. So strong, in fact, that it has messed both of them up quite a bit over the years. In fact, this got so intense that when they finally joined back together following some time apart, Eddie Brock didn't really know what to do with the symbiote. It was different. It had been with other hosts, it was scared, and it desperately wanted to rekindle its relationship with Eddie and keep the two of them together forever. In desperation to stay bonded with its host, Venom was willing to do anything, including kill anyone who got in the way of its obsession with and love of Eddie Brock. This included even killing a priest who suggested that the relationship sounded unhealthy to Brock. And even after all they have been through, including multiple offspring, battling their own offspring, lies, secrets, deceit, shame, guilt, fighting heroes, becoming a hero, devouring people, they still have managed somehow to keep the relationship alive and both stay alive themselves all the while. That's pretty crazy considering the rate of divorce these days. Number 9, experimented on. Not only has the Venom symbiote survived being forcibly separated from their host, but while in isolation, they also survived the forced experimentation of the Life Foundation, who forced the symbiote to produce a number of offspring for the Life Foundation's own uses. The whole process did not seem pleasant for either the symbiote or really for Eddie. The Life Foundation took 5 offspring from Venom with force and left the symbiote drained and exhausted as a result. They also kept poor Venom in a sonic prison, which meant escape attempts would result in agony and be pretty tricky. And beyond that, they also had sonic weapons to be used at the ready. When Venom tried to utilize their human half of Eddie, this only made the Life Foundation wonder if Eddie Brock's life was actually worth anything to them. Yikes. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want more Venom lists, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8, escaped Null. Well, really, I suppose the Venom was outcast for refusing to follow Null, but still, I'm surprised that the symbiote survived that entire falling out. Based on what we saw of Null during the King in Black event, he seems like a ruler who would be more inclined to destroy those that refuse to follow him as opposed to letting them go. Or, you know, just like make them rejoin the Hive forcefully and take away their individualism, which is also what happened. Still, the Venom symbiote in issue 35 of the 2018 series, which is also Legacy issue number 200, shares with Dylan that this is why their name, which is actually not something pronounceable by humans as it is communicated through vibrations associated with the emotional spectrum, is so different from the other symbiotes around, because they were cast out of the Hive. Perhaps Null believed that casting out the Venom symbiote would have been enough to kill them, but if that was his thought process, it seems that he greatly underestimated this little symbiote that could. Number 7, Lee Price. Anytime I go back to reading these issues with Lee Price, it just breaks my heart and kind of ties my stomach in knots. Poor Venom. It's amazing to think about just all that the symbiote went through while bonded with Lee Price, who really was a jerk. How much they were mistreated, and then of course, how they ended up taking all the trauma they suffered and managing to use it to propel them into something greater, something better, as they continued to work towards being the hero that their partner, Flash Thompson, had taught them that they could be. Yay! Venom at this time as well needed a host, so they didn't really have much of a choice but try and stick with Lee because that was the only option at the time, despite the fact that they disagreed with his morals. Lee Price was really awful to the Venom symbiote, and not only that, but also made some pretty bad decisions just in general for what kind of activity the two of them would get involved in. Fortunately, Venom was able to survive their relationship and come out of it much stronger even. Silver lining. Number 6, escaped symbiotic prison. Which is pretty crazy when you consider that technically the Venom symbiote was also on the death row of symbiote prison. That's right, they were ready to eliminate the symbiote for wanting to bond with his hosts, working with them as a team as opposed to dominating them. This could be a different version of the story where the Venom symbiote was kicked out of the hive, or it could be something that happened later after the symbiote was kicked out, which seems to be what the canon is leading us to now. Either way, instead of being vaporized following its imprisonment where it was to be studied by the other symbiotes, it only managed to evade its sentence by sheer luck, it seems. The prison lab in which it was being held was transported to Battleworld, where the symbiote was then released by Peter Parker, making its first appearance in terms of comic book history. Number 5, corrupted by endless rage and bloodlust. One of the things that almost completely consumed and overwhelmed the Venom symbiote was its sense of rage. This started possibly when it was kidnapped and weaponized by an alien arms dealer, but progressively got worse with time as it soaked up the emotions of its hosts when it came to Earth, especially Spider-Man. There was a lot of emotions with Spider-Man. Eddie Brock was a big part, likely, of the Venom symbiote's sense of rage as well, but even then the symbiote became too aggressive for even him, and at one point he actually had to be like, I think I'm out. Later it would bond with Matt Gargan, which definitely made things a lot worse. The only thing that would save it from all this rage, hate, violence, and bloodlust, which it couldn't seem to really escape, was being reunited with the symbiote hive during its time bonded with Flash Thompson. Here, the Venom symbiote was purified, allowing it to go on in the world without drowning in emotional turmoil, and freeing the symbiote to truly become a hero while bonded to Flash as Agent Venom. Number 4, devoured by a dragon. Well, sort of. It was more like Venom was enveloped by a symbiote dragon. This was when Eddie Brock first ran into Null and learned the darker history of the symbiotes, including the history of his other, the Venom symbiote. Venom was fighting with Miles when they came to, and that was when Null and his symbiote dragon arrived, or well, a version of Null. In reality, this was not Null's true form, as he was still far away and not really fully awakened yet, but he was beginning to wake up, and even as a sort of symbiotic projection, this version of Null was still quite strong. After blowing up the dragon, it reformed and then kind of enveloped them while they talked with Null, which they probably didn't realize until it was too late. In the end, Venom only escaped because of the help of Miles Morales' Spider-Man, who distracted Null just long enough for them to get away, cutting through the dragon, who it turns out was in mid-flight once more, only to plummet down to Earth. Another thing, they survived because Venom had now gained the power to make wings, probably as a result of its interaction with Null and his dragon. Number 3, Red Goblin. Well, Venom might be a pretty tough cookie now in the comics, and quite OP as a character and as a symbiote even alone. When Venom, bonded with Eddie Brock, came up against Red Goblin, the Carnage symbiote bonded with Norman Osborn, who had also recently been repowered with the Goblin Serum, it was no surprise the Venom appeared to be pretty outclassed. Despite the fact that it struggled to keep up, the Venom symbiote and Eddie both managed to survive this fight relatively well. Eddie even managed to get a few good hits in too before he called it quits. Venom would end up bonded to Spider-Man for a good amount of that fight, and also managed to survive till the end, with both the Venom and the Carnage symbiotes basically being dismissed, just as Spider-Man and Green Goblin decided to duke it out themselves. Sadly, as well, Venom would also survive the death of his friend and former host, Flash Thompson. Number 2, died and went to hell. During the Venom symbiote's time bonded to Flash Thompson, at one point they crossed paths with Mephisto's evil son, Blackheart. While battling against Blackheart, who was attempting to bring hell to all of Earth, they ended up dying. Because they were already on the threshold of hell when they all died, with Blackheart beginning to bring hell to the surface world, Venom went to hell, like actual hell. And yet, despite being there, Venom and the rest of the team he found himself with were able to escape by making a deal with Mephisto. Not something they wanted to do, but kind of something they had to do in the end. As a result, he survived the whole ordeal and was returned to Earth. Hell Earth, but they ended up fighting back against Blackheart and making it full Earth again. Number 1, thrown off a skyscraper and killed! During the King in Black event, I think we all had a certain expectation when it came to how we expected expected that story to go. It was the event that Donny Cates and Ryan Stegman had been building up to since Venom issue number 1 of their 2018 series. The final showdown was about to happen between Venom and the god of symbiotes, Null, and we knew it would likely be up to Venom and possibly his son Dylan to save the day. Which is why many of us were left in amazement when, kinda near the beginning of this event, Venom faced off with Null only to be thrown to his death from up high off a building. Venom was absorbed back into Null, seemingly amalgamated back into the Hive, and kinda forced to go with the flow, basically snapped back into order, and Eddie was left alone just to die. Fortunately, despite Venom dying, they would find their way back to life and ultimately succeed in defeating Null, and even ended up replacing him, becoming the new ruler of Clintar and all the symbiotes throughout the universe. Number 10. Experimented on in Ravencroft. At one point, Sabretooth managed to capture Wolverine and handed him over to Nathaniel Essex, aka Mr. Sinister, who tormented him and also used him for experimentation. Wolverine would get out of this one by earning the sympathy of a fellow doctor who it turns out was actually a werewolf. She would help Wolverine to get free, but ultimately end up being caught by Victor Creed and Dr. Essex herself, who would then take her in Logan's place to experiment on. Poor Doctor. Logan's time at Ravencroft was so bad that Victor was actually fine with not tormenting Wolverine himself, instead being content with the terrible experiments that Essex had dreamed up for Logan, believing that what he was doing was even worse than anything Victor himself could come up with. You can check out this horror story in the pages of Ruins of Ravencroft, Sabretooth. Number 9. Torn in Half. It's important to note that Wolverine made his first appearance in a Hulk comic. As such, it shouldn't be surprising that these two have duked it out on more than one occasion, with Wolverine's healing factor generally being put to the test against Hulk's immense strength. In the Ultimate Universe, Wolverine isn't actually believed to have a healing factor either. More, his powers are believed to be tied to increased chances of survival and kinda evolution. In other words, it's believed that his body actually adapts to the duress it is currently under, and finds a way to just, make things work till he can recover. In the case of Ultimate Hulk vs. Wolverine, where Wolverine was torn in half in that first issue by the Ultimate version of the Hulk, in the first 2 pages in fact, Ultimate Wolverine then was forced to crawl around, looking for the bottom half of his torso so that he could reattach it. Yeah, a lot more gross than what we might see in the pages of a 616 Wolverine vs. Hulk comic. And friends, before we move on to this next spot, if you are loving this list and you want to hear about more crazy stuff that Wolverine has survived, be sure to let us know by giving this video a thumbs up. Number 8. Adamantium Poisoning. What's pretty crazy is that Logan is actually battling this pretty much all the time. The adamantium that is bonded to his skeleton is actually slowly killing him, and the only thing that manages to keep him alive is his healing factor. In the Old Man Logan universe, his healing factor gets weaker with time and eventually he begins to be poisoned to death by his own body. While he does ultimately die, it's pretty crazy to think about just how long he managed to live. And even when Old Man Logan seems to be dying in the Dead Man Logan series, he still finds a way to keep going through a lot of that with the Regenix drug. Of course, it turns out that the side effects of Regenix are also kinda lethal, and eventually Logan does run out of it, using up his last vial. So in the end, Old Man Logan just decides to give in and succumb to death. Still, he had a pretty insane run. Number 7. Devoured by the Hulk. The Old Man Logan universe is much darker than what we're used to, being set in a post-apocalyptic future where the villains actually all pretty much won against the heroes and then turned the world into kind of a wasteland. Logan is just trying to get by and no longer goes by Wolverine here. He manages to find some happiness though, settling down with a woman named Maureen and starting a family. Unfortunately, they happen to live on land that ends up in Hulk gang territory. You might think, wait, isn't Hulk a hero? Isn't this a good thing? Not here, he isn't a hero, and it definitely is not a good thing. The gamma radiation in his old age basically turns Bruce Banner insane. When Old Man Logan doesn't arrive early enough for the Hulk gang with the rent money that they believe his family owes them, they pretty much kill them all. Well, except for Logan, sadly. As a result, Logan seeks revenge on the Hulk. During their fight, Hulk eats Logan, but in the end, Logan wins, giving Hulk some really bad indigestion when he cuts his way out of his gut. Number 6. Shot in the head. I can give you at least 5 separate occasions where this has actually happened in the comics, but honestly, there are definitely many more than that, I am sure. At this point, there may have even been too many to count. I could probably make a top 10 list of just the times that this happened by itself. One of the times this happened though was when Wolverine had been possessed by the Muramasa blade, or the Ebony blade, while under the guise of Patch. He ended up capturing Jessica Drew, aka Spider-Woman, which left Patch's friends to try and recover Jess and save Logan from this evil influence. Lindsay McCabe, Jessica Drew's and Patch's good friend at the time, was the one who ended up forced to shoot Patch in the head, and she seemed pretty confused when Patch managed to mysteriously recover, because she could have sworn that, she shot him in the head. Of course, we'd later learn that Patch wasn't really fooling anyone, trying to pretend that he wasn't Wolverine because, all the X-Men were supposed to be dead at that point. So either Lindsay didn't know this yet, or was simply playing dumb to help Logan feel more confident in his disguise. To watch Lindsay wrestle with whether or not to shoot, you can check out the first arc of the 1988 Wolverine series, with Lindsay taking said kill shot in issue number 3. And I know I wrote 89, but it's actually 88. I always get that confused. 89 is the miniseries, even though that's volume 1, but it's 89, so 88, but that's volume 2. It's a little confusing, is it not? Number 5, drowning. While this might not sound that crazy on paper in regards to everything else on this list, for Wolverine it is. It's been heavily suggested throughout history that water is not really where Wolverine is in his element. This has to do with the fact that Wolverine is actually quite heavy with all that added adamantium weight. I believe before he said it's over like 100 pounds of extra weight. He also can't really fully heal from fully drowning. Eventually, it's believed that it would kill him. And he's come pretty close to death by being stuck underwater for prolonged periods of time, which is pretty crazy considering drowning his own son, Daken, in a puddle was the way that he defeated him when the two were forced to fight one another. One time, Wolverine seemingly drowned during an underwater fight with Tiger Shark, when his claws got stuck in a coral reef. Fortunately, we learned in issue 20 of the 1988 Wolverine series that he managed to escape, and only suffered from briefly being deaf after escaping the coral and returning to land. Wolverine has also fallen into oceans and washed up on foreign shores a few times, and lived to tell that tale, or those tales, although there are times when that experience seems to mess with his memories as opposed to his hearing. In fact, I'm trying to think of another time that he's drowned and his hearing has been messed up, but I mean, that definitely makes sense if you're deep underwater, because that would mess your hearing up. How come that never comes up again? Does it come up again? I don't know. Let me know if it does. Let me know what issue I need to read where that comes up again, because that would be cool. Number 4, steamrolled. Instead of being rickrolled, he got steamrolled. During a team up with the Punisher gone wrong, Wolverine managed to survive a whole no-holds-barred fight with Frank Castle. Well, definitely no holds barred from Castle's side anyways. The Punisher shot Wolverine repeatedly with an Uzi, kneecapping him as well, and then for good measure, he also decided to just run him over with a steamroller, just to really make sure, Wolverine wouldn't be getting up anytime soon. The whole fight is brutal and really only starts because Punisher sees the opportunity to use Wolverine as a weapon, so he kinda pokes him in places where he knows he's gonna start to rage. Which, Wolverine loves when people do that. He loves when people annoy him so that he can go into a berserker rage and be used as a weapon. That's his favorite thing. The fight all went down during the days of the Marvel Knights in Punisher issue number 17 from his 2001 series, which of course was written by none other than Garth Ennis. Because, come on, this whole fight, it definitely sounds like Ennis. Oh, poor Wolverine. Number 3, forced adamantium removal. One of the craziest moments possibly in all of Marvel Comics has to be when Wolverine had his adamantium forcefully removed from his body by Magneto. His adamantium isn't just like a jacket for his skeleton, by the way. It's literally fully bonded to Wolverine's skeleton and his body. And while Wolverine does have a healing factor, he still feels all the pain of his injuries. All the pain. The healing factor doesn't diminish any of that pain, so I cannot even imagine just how painful this whole experience would have been for Logan. The experience was actually so traumatic that it also seemed to turn Wolverine feral for a good amount of time in the comics, and he even seemed to lose his nose as a casualty. Well, either the loss of the adamantium was what made him feral and made him lose his nose, or the experience did, or some combination thereof. But either way, it was clearly very traumatic for him. Number 2, reduced to a skeleton. This all went down in Wolverine's tie-in issues for Civil War. In issue number 43 of the 2003 Wolverine series, Logan squares off with Nitro, the one responsible for killing almost all of the New Warriors as well as hundreds of civilians. Nitro's superpower makes him basically a living bomb, and it's this explosive power that he uses on Wolverine. The strength and heat of the explosion is so strong that it reduced Wolverine to just a skeleton, and yet within a few brief moments, I kid you not, Wolverine has almost completely regenerated and somehow healed, with flames still visible licking at his back, and while he is still smoking from that explosion. That's bananas. Though of course this was the early 2000s, a time when Wolverine was pretty overpowered in the comics due to him being so crazy popular, so this was like peak healing factor times. All he needs is a few pages and he's like, I'm better. I'm like basically fully healed almost. Number 1, encased in liquid adamantium. Wolverine did actually die in the comics during the death of Wolverine's story. Sort of. But it ended up of course not being permanent, and eventually his corpse disappeared, and then once more Wolverine showed up again, back alive. However, this was a pretty good attempt at finally burying Wolverine from a writing standpoint. Or I guess less burying him, more turning his corpse into like kind of a morbid Wolverine monument. During the Death of Wolverine arc, we saw Wolverine's healing factor begin to dissipate and fail him as Wolverine learned that there seemed to be someone who wanted him dead. In truth, it was the head of the Weapon X program who sought Wolverine to try and duplicate his healing factor. He was trying to, you know, do more adamantium bonding. When he learns that Wolverine no longer has his healing factor, the two end up in a fight against one another. As the founder of Weapon X, Dr. Cornelius attempts to escape by activating the adamantium bonding process on 3 remaining test subjects. Wolverine puts a stop to the process by breaking open the containers. However, this results in him getting covered in molten liquid adamantium, which ultimately encases, hardens, and then suffocates Logan to death. But then of course, Wolverine is later resurrected, regains his healing factor, and ultimately he returns again. So that's how he's alive now. Yay.